The F-22 was to be the mainstay of the US air power, to serve well into the 2050s. But in the last several days, there have been some shocking but not quite unexpected statements coming from the mouths of various US Air Force officials. Most notably, the Air Force Chief of Staff, General Brown, said he intends for the Air Force to go down to 4 fighter types in the 2030s, and that the F-22 Raptor will not be in that mix. It is to be replaced by the 6th generation fighter jet effort, the fruit of the NGAD program, which stands for the Next Generation Air Dominance. Those intentions were then echoed by Lieutenant General Highnote, Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Integration and Requirements. Highnote clearly stated that F-22s will begin to retire around the year 2030. Of course, no type gets retired all at once, overnight. Given that there are 186 Raptors flying today, and given that the NGAD effort will need time to ramp up in numbers, it's quite likely that the last Raptor will leave the US Air Force closer to the year 2040. Highnote also added that the NGAD fighter should come into operational service less than 10 years from now. While that may seem awfully quick based on previous development programs, one of the most revolutionary features of the next-gen program is sped-up development cycle. Binkov went in depth on NGAD in an earlier video, though. Curiously, Highnote also alluded to a separate future fighter under the NGAD program, also in development. Whether that is the clean-sheet, low-cost F-16 replacement or simply another part of the family of systems for air dominance is unknown at this point. That F-16 replacement came from the realization the F-35 sustainment costs are simply too high to have 1700 Lightnings in the fleet. But the final decision to go through with a clean-sheet replacement is not expected for another 6 to 8 years. The 4 fighter types that are to outlive the Raptor, according to General Brown, are thus the NGAD fighter, the F-35, the F-16 and the F-15EX. Evidently, the F-35 may not be procured in the numbers once suggested. Delivered to the Air Force since 2011, the F-35 has seen a gradual ramp-up in production. Since 2018, the annual procurement rates have been stuck at around 6-ish planes. But most recently, future procurement plans show a reduction. Just 48 F-35As in fiscal year 2022 and only 43 planes per year from then on to 2026. Such a pace would mean that the 1700th F-35 would come around the year 2055. Quite interestingly, the US Air Force gave the manufacturer an ultimatum: get costs under control over the next 6 to 8 years, or the whole F-35 procurement program will be greatly reduced. The interesting bit there is that the 6 to 8 years is exactly the time frame for the clean-sheet F-16 successor decision. In a way, it seems the US Air Force is pressuring Lockheed Martin with that other program. Either make F-35s cheaper to operate, or we will get a new fighter, possibly from a different manufacturer. But let us get back to the F-22. Being retired in the 2030s, it will mean that the airframes will be roughly 25 to 30 years old once they leave service. That's quite young compared to other types serving in the Air Force. The remaining F-16 airframes will be some 40 years old on the average by that time frame. While the F-15Cs will likely all be retired by then, those serving today are approaching 40 years. And the Strike Eagles, though they may also be replaced by the F-15EX, may go past 40 years of age by then as well. When one looks at the age of the fighter generations, the decision to retire the F-22 is even more shocking. The F-22 entered service in 2005. It looks to be completely retired by 2040. The F-16 entered service in 1978. Current plans seem to indicate 800 F-16s will still be in service in 2026. If the F-35 is to replace it on a one-for-one basis at some 40-ish planes procured per year, some F-16s might fly all the way to 2050. F-15EX is a brand new plane, internal systems-wise, and not your average F-15 of the old days. But the basic design and the airframe design did start to serve all the way back in 1976. Given that these EXs are designed to withstand 20,000 flight hours, in theory, they could remain in service even after we step into the 22nd century. The key difference between F-22 and F-15EX is role. F-22 is to go in first, take point and go into enemy airspace if needed. F-15EX is to serve as a standoff attacker, both with long-range air-to-ground weapons and long-range air-to-air missiles, serving as a missile truck. The 2022 US Air Force budget talking points disclosed that the F-15EX can carry an outsized air-to-air weapon, which translates to a missile so big it can't be carried internally by F-22 or F-35. Carrying it externally would ruin their stealth. But the F-15EX is not stealthy to begin with, so it may make for a perfect companion to the stealthy fighters in some situations. The F-22, despite being the top dog today, still has issues. Its fleet is small and it's been out of production since 2011. Air Force officials said the vendor companies that are providing spare parts and sustainment are slowly vanishing. Recent Air Force planning document bluntly stated that the F-22 will not be competitive by 2040. Even today, it has some issues that may not be cost-efficient to get resolved before retirement. It does not allow for use of helmet-mounted displays. That means less than perfect situational awareness for the pilot. And if it comes to close-range combat, all the vector thrust maneuverability and fancy missiles may not work against an older plane with equally fancy missile and helmet display, allowing for off-bore lock-ons. It has no infrared search and track system, which is something almost all modern fighters seem to be adding, including the F-35. And adding anything to the F-22 is extremely hard. Its stealthy design very much dictates the location of any subsystem on the plane. It's almost impossible to find a new place on the plane to add something and still keep the plane stealthy. That's one of the reasons why the F-22 still doesn't have a transmitter that can send data to other US planes. F-22s can talk amongst themselves via special data link that other fighters don't use. Talking to F-35s or F-15s, for example, requires an intermediary platform with special arrays. But such intermediary planes will not always be available on the battlefield. There were plans to remedy some of those shortcomings, like the data link and the helmet display, from 2024 onward in a midlife upgrade effort. But that was in 2018, back when Raptors were envisioned to serve into the 2050s. Whether those plans will still stick with this early retirement is anyone's guess. Communications and sensors are being modernized to help the plane stay relevant until NGAD replaces it. Though some new weapons like the upcoming AMRAAM replacement, the AIM-260, may also get added. Still, as General Highnote noted, Raptor has its limitations that can't be removed by modernized airframes, like the Raptor's range, which is fairly limited and shorter than F-35's or F-15's range. And while the newer F-35 has more flexible design and more electronic signal arrays will be added to it over the years, the F-22's design is stuck and it's basically unworkable to add more arrays to it, which would allow for monitoring a broader set of frequencies, for example. Those are all issues that may decide the outcome of a future air battle. Finally, even it's revolutionary for its time, stealth is showing its age. Its radar-absorbing materials are previous generation technology and are harder to maintain than those of the F-35. And over the decades, the old mantra of shape being much more important than materials for stealth has ceased to be true. Some years ago, US Air Force officials stated that the F-35 actually has a lower radar signature than the F-22 against certain frequencies. So, having an expensive fleet to upkeep, which is losing its edge over its potential opponents, is clearly enough of a reason to have that whole fleet retired as soon as possible, even if that means keeping some of the older types in service longer than the F-22 will be kept. Of course, the NGAD effort is key to F-22 retirement, and before next gen matures, it is likely we will still see Raptors fly high in the skies, but they may also have more and more trouble defeating their adversaries.